Good afternoon. My name's Rebecca Robertson, and I'm president and executive producer of Park Avenue Armory. And I want to thank you all for coming to this really, really exciting day. This has been planned by the Aspen Institute and Park Avenue Armory. I think in a moment when we can maybe all want to have a conversation about how art is changing in America and how art can change America. I want to, on our part, say that this is the first of a series called Interrogations of Form that is directed by Avery Willis Hoffman. Where's Avery? Oh, she's disappeared. I knew she would. Anyway, big shout out to Avery because she organized all of this on our side, working with Damien. I just want to thank her for that, and also to our staff who's been so fantastic. So just to say, obviously 1 month into a new administration in Washington, we're really honored to gather this incredible group of people, artists, government, thinkers, activists, of course all of you are thinkers, to come and talk to us a little bit about how art can change America, or how art is reflected in this new America. I want to say that we're very excited that we're streaming live for Facebook, so for those people who couldn't come, and we have quite a waiting list actually, you can go on our web page and our Facebook page and see it streamed live, which is really great. So I also want to say that there's a lot going on today, and I'm sure all of you have gotten your programs. So there's a map in here, and it tells you where it is that you can go and see each one of the programs. There's a lounge down at the end of the hall at this end, at the other end of the building, where you can go and sit and talk to your friends. Please go and see our artist salons, which are really fantastic and are both on the second and the first floor. Finally, let me just say that this event would not have been possible, of course, without the amazing and extraordinary collaboration of Damien Wetzel and the Aspen Institute. So please join me.
Thanks so much, Rebecca, and welcome to all of you. This is, as Rebecca said, a particular time in history. And from the cultural sector, as an artist myself and as someone working in arts policy at the Aspen Institute and in other venues that have the opportunity to make change, to guide change, to be on that edge. It's a particular obligation, and it's also a reflection of our time, as we always say about the arts. They reflect our time, but in this moment, it's about that edge. What is the role of the arts? And that's what this day is all about. Planning this with the Armory, first of all, it's such a pleasure to be back working with you again, Rebecca. This is our second collaboration with the Armory and with Avery Willis Hoffman, who is an incredible leader. As she helped to form this program, we looked at so many different things. And I also want to call out Danae Pointer on the Aspen Institute staff, who's standing back there, Danae, who worked tirelessly in creating this program. So we looked for the intersections, and we'll begin today with those intersections at the issue that is probably taking up enormous amounts of your brain matter in this house, immigration in America, and the role of citizenship, and what does it mean to belong? To be an American, what is that? And where does culture fit in that equation? And what is the role? What is the obligation? And we're going to examine that and many other aspects of the intersection of arts and culture from that aspect. One of the biggest things that I talk about in my work, whether as an artist or as someone working in arts policy, is that idea of participation. And that is an encouragement to all of you today. This is not a passive activity. I don't believe in art as a passive activity in any case, but I certainly don't believe it in this framework. So look for the opportunities to participate every bit as much as you imagine when you see an artist walk on the stage, or you see a painting when you walk into a room. How is it actually active as opposed to something you just look at and admire? That is your role as well. So it's a pleasure. We'll be seeing you throughout the day at many things. Rebecca, back to you for a moment.
And now for our first inspiration of the day, I want to welcome our Armory Youth Corps and the Aspen Institute Scholars.
I too sing America.
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 I am the darker brother.
They send me to eat in the kitchen
when company comes.
But I laugh and eat well and grow strong.
And grow strong.
And grow strong.
And grow strong.
And grow strong. Tomorrow, I'll be at the table when company comes.
Nobody dare say to me.
Eat in the kitchen.
Then besides, they'll see how beautiful I am.
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 And be ashamed.
I too am America.
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 I too
Yo
am
también
American.
soy Americana.
I too am America.
I too am America.
I too am America.
I too am America.
I too
I too am American.
I too.
I too am America. I too am America.
I too am America.
I too am
I too in America.
I too
am America.
Thank you.
The mic over to my friend and colleague, Eric Liu, the founder of Citizen University, empowering ideals and actions of citizenship around the country. Eric, welcome.
Thank you, Damien. And I'm sure this is on. We'll just switch those out. Thank you, Damien. Actually, why don't we, in the interest of time, just segue straight here, and let me invite the panelists to join me up on stage here, and I will narrate as we move. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Eric Liu. I run an organization called Citizen University, and our work is all about democratizing understanding of power in civic life. And we partner deeply with Damien and the Aspen Institute. I also run a small program out of the Aspen Institute on citizenship and American identity. And we're so grateful to Damien, his team, to the entire team here at the Armory, and this remarkable group of panelists here to get us going today. But most of all, we're grateful for the fact that you have decided to show up. The citizen in Citizen University, I think, is worth taking a moment to unpack what we mean in that name. Our work is focused on the United States, but when we talk about citizen or citizenship, we don't mean in terms of documentation status under the immigration and naturalization laws of the United States. When I say citizen, I mean essentially people who, like you today, decide to show up. I mean people who are members of the body, people who are pro-social contributors to community and to country. And by that notion, as we will hear throughout this conversation, there are many people in the United States right now who lack the documents but who live like great citizens. And there are many people who have the documents but do not. And so the interest that we have today in starting this conversation is in focusing on this deeper ethical notion of what it means to be a pro-social contributor to community and to country, and the ways in which this particular community and country, this American community and country, has a particular set of frames, of ideas, of ideals, of creed, of history, of images and iconography, that we are all, whether we chose to or not, we are all the inheritors of, and in some sense, the stewards of, and then in another sense, the remixers of. And the beauty and the power of this gathering today, and the genius of Damien's focus on the intersection of immigration and the arts, is that both the act of immigration, of migration, and the act of making or being immersed in art, both of these are fundamentally acts of imagination. They are acts of belief in a different possibility of country and community. They're acts of hope and vision. And though it was alluded that we are gathering here at a time of great upheaval and great change nationally in our politics, I sit here with this group today incredibly optimistic, because I think there is a surge now in this country in response to events, a surge, a renewal of appreciation for what it means in this broad ethical sense to be a citizen and to own that creatively, morally, and in every other sense. So let me introduce our panelists here, and I'm going to pose to them a common question, and then we're going to really have a more free-flowing conversation for the balance of our hour here. So immediately to my left here, my good friend and frequent collaborator, Jose Antonio Vargas, founder of Define American, which you will hear a bit more about, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, and in ways that are both a boon and a burden, probably one of the country's most famous undocumented people, and one of the people who is an inspiration to me in this broader ethical notion of what it means to live like a citizen. Next, we have Tania Bruguera, who is the Armory Artist-in-Residence, and also, I just learned today, the very first artist-in-residence in the New York City Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, which is a very exciting thing. She's a performance artist exploring the relationship between art and activism and social change with roots in, as we will hear, in Cuba, but work that spans continents and spans mindsets and is really about exploring and unpacking and unweaving and then reweaving these notions of migration, place, and identity. Next, Nisha Agarwal, who is the commissioner of the New York City Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. And I hope you know what a pioneer you have in this city, in Nisha, and in the office that she's... I'm based in Seattle, where we do pretty well by immigrants and refugees, but I think the country looks to this office and to Nisha for innovation and the courage to innovate in ways to serve immigrants and refugees in this city. And then last but not least, Sarah Lewis, who is a professor at Harvard University, author, professor of art history, and the editor of a celebrated issue of Aperture, which was called Vision and Justice, which we will hear more about. And I love actually, in fact, I'll get to you later, the kind of choice to phrase that as vision and justice, rather than say vision of justice, and your choice of preposition there. But wonderful to have you all here. So the common question... The common question that I want to pose to all of you and have you each spend 4 or 5 minutes speaking to is simply this, as a way to kind of begin our discussion, but also to kick off this day. What your feelings are on the role of culture in making an American an American. So I don't want to necessarily go and kind of, march down the row of seats here. So who'd like to dive in first? Nisha, I'm going to pick on you.
Sure, I'll start. So thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here and really delighted to be on this panel with great friends and colleagues. So I'll answer this question in a couple of ways. One is by answering, I'm usually a government official, but as an actual person and telling you a little bit about my family story and how I think that tells us a little bit about what sort of culture and America. And then I will tell you a little bit about our office and the ways in which we have incorporated culture, art, visual imagery into what we're trying to do. So my own story, my parents are both originally from India, and a little bit about them. So they had an arranged marriage, but the arranged marriage was not very traditional. It was a little bit unconventional in that they were allowed to meet one another beforehand and had veto rights about who they were going to marry. My mom, at least as from photos of what I can tell, was very glamorous and a bit of a hippie. There's sort of a picture of her where she's sort of holding a peace sign up and with long hair. And my father is the exact opposite. He was an engineer and a very sort of nerdy, he had a pocket protector in his photos and things like that. So, these are two very unlikely people who met each other and decided, okay, I will hitch my wagon to this person's wagon for the rest of our lives together on one meeting, and ended up coming to the United States together after they married. For my father, this was by choice. He went to graduate school in the United States and He's an engineer, from what I've told you, was enamored of things like the American highways. He was enamored of the fact that there wasn't rampant corruption in the country. For my mom, it was not by choice. She was very unhappy, actually, leaving her home country. And I remember growing up and hearing her listening to John Denver, Take Me Home, Country Roads, sort of very sadly listening to songs like that. But both of them were sort of rebels in their own way, and I think kind of brought that rebellious spirit for my father. One reason he came was because he didn't want to be part of the family business, and he wanted to kind of chart his own path. And I think my mom, as I mentioned, very kind of rebellious in her own right, but also came out of obligation. And I think both of those dynamics are very much a part of how we think about American culture and life. They also sort of, in their experience in the United States, I think faced a variety of different challenges. My father often sort of fighting and speaking out against discrimination in his workplace. All of the Asian workers were segregated in the workplace, and so they filed lawsuits around that. For my mom, she assimilated better in American culture, but I think have filled with critique and dissent. So when she actually became a US citizen, there was a sort of tiny camera crew in the room where they took their oath, and they came up to every immigrant and said, tell us about why you became an American citizen. And of course, my mom went off on some sort of political statement about some of the problems that still exist in American policy. So I think some of these notions of both kind of fighting and speaking out, but also kind of dissent more generally, I think also very much a part of the American experience and very much a part of what immigrants are bringing. And all of that, I think, taught me one thing, which is that that's where creativity comes from. And that could be creativity in terms of organizing for change. It could be creativity in terms of art and culture, and the importance of building that into our lives. And I've certainly tried to do that in my own. Which I think brings me to, surprisingly, a government agency, the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. And the short explanation of what we are is a bridge between city government and New York City's many diverse immigrant communities. And I could talk your ear off about policies and initiatives that we've pushed, but what I want to focus on here is just the different ways in which we've been trying to bring some creativity into our work. So the first is that we launched a citywide municipal identification card program called ID NYC, and actually the Park Avenue Armory is a member of that in terms of providing cultural benefits through the card. Having the ID card allows you to get a year of membership, free membership, in a variety of different cultural institutions. The purpose of the program was to be able to provide identification, government-issued identification for people like undocumented immigrants who may not be able to. But we wanted to make it fuller than that. We wanted to make it a card that sort of provided access to a range of different, treasures of the city and basic amenities of the city. And I think the cultural component of that, in partnership with my colleague Tom Finkelpearl, has really been a very important and incredibly successful aspect of the program. So really thinking about how you can bridge immigration and culture. The second piece that we've really thought about is how we portray immigrants in our sort of government materials. So as an example, we have a program that provides legal services to immigrants across the board. It's free and it's safe. And when we were thinking about how we advertise that in subways and how we advertise it sort of in flyers, we hired an artist to do watercolors to actually show what the diversity of immigrants looks like in New York, a woman wearing a hijab, just a range of different types of people. And that sends an important message. It sends one message: you can get legal services if you're an immigrant, but it also says that this is who New York is and who we serve. And then finally, we are delighted to be able to have an artist-in-residence in Tania. The first time my agency has had that, to really think and use sort of her skills and expertise to think through how do we communicate with immigrants better, how do we incorporate their viewpoints, and we're working on a project we can't say too much about, but the power of that will be very exciting. So I'll stop there.
Wonderful, and that's kind of a perfect segue. Tania, why don't you go next?
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I'm honored to be with all these people here and there. Definitely, I'm also very happy to work at Moya. Although I have to say that has been one of the biggest challenges I have as an artist, because I arrived like an artist saying like, I know what I'm going to do here. And then I arrive and they have more creativity than I have. And I had to say, like she said, I have to go back and figure out how can I get ahead of them. They're very good. They're very caring for the people they're working for. So I'm very honored and humbled to work with you. But also going through that, I think that my experience as an immigrant has been a little different because I am from Cuba, and declaring yourself as an immigrant from Cuba means something different here and there. So I feel like when you're an immigrant, you're not only in relation with the place where you arrived, but also you always define yourself in relation with what you left. And in that case, for many, many years, I said I was not an immigrant. And I really say, I know I'm here just to study, no, I'm here just working, no, I'm here just, you know. But then one day I realized that why I was having this reaction in terms of the United States was because I feel that sometimes immigrants here have categories. Not only undocumented and documented, but you can be an undocumented immigrant or documented immigrant valued by your skills, your class, you know, like professional skills, versus the people who come just as arms to work in factories. So I think I noticed at some point that there was an internal tension between immigrants, because some people who are immigrants, whether paper or not, feel disconnected with other people who were their class, their people, but they were just lower level. You know, it's not smart person or graduate from a university. So I felt that, and this is the first time I started calling myself an immigrant, because I wanted to bring that conversation. I want to say, why am I a good immigrant? And somebody else like Maria Canela or like Veronica, or all the people that I was working at the Corona Queens, at the project we do at Queens Museums, were the bad immigrants. You know, and it was not about papers. It was about what they give to society. And I feel like in the United States, we waste a lot of things, and one of the things we waste is the knowledge immigrants come with. We don't appreciate all the knowledge and the histories they come with, and we kind of want them to adapt their history to our history here. And I feel that's a loss. And yeah, so I think that's something that I want to.
Well, I'm going to ask you in a moment to say more about this this piece of work that you've done with the Queens Museum and artists and immigrants there. But Sarah, I think this fundamental question of the role of culture in making an American is, it couldn't be more squarely in your wheelhouse, given the work that you've been doing and you were describing, both from a contemporary stance, but also just in looking at American history, the ways that symbols, images, and icons have been used or abused to shape a notion of national identity.
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me, and thank you to Damien Wotzel and everyone here at the Armory, Avery Willis in particular, for organizing this, and it's really an honor. Yes, this is in my wheelhouse for a number of reasons. I should say, though, first, as a kind of framing device for what I'm about to say, that the answer to your question about the role of culture for defining American citizenship can come when you reverse the question. I think in both a historic sense and a contemporary sense, we define American citizenship through culture, right? And I don't mean this in terms of shared habits and things that we enjoy together. I think when you look at what has defined the concept of citizenship as a law, it has been cultural constructs, right? So what I do in terms of my scholarship and in terms of the work I teach at Harvard, I teach a course on vision and justice, which is the same title as the Aperture issue. I see Brendan here, I'm managing editor of Aperture here, is look at the foundations of this idea, beginning with the 1790 naturalization law, right? Which defines citizenship as whiteness, ultimately, and the ability to hold property, right? And you can trace the various different amendments made to the Naturalization Law and Act to expand the notion of citizenship. But at every turn, it was done through culture, right? What's the face of this country look like? And how do you disseminate ideas about what the face of this country looks like? You do that through culture, right? And so that's a foundational, I think, idea a principle that I work with and work through. I would be, I think, remiss, though, in not bringing up into this conversation an American who's being recognized more and more and that is Frederick Douglass.
He's just doing great work. He's killing it. That guy's just killing it.
It just was he here yet? Well, he's always with us. He is always with us. This building was built, in 1877, is that right? And around that time, he had been drafting and redrafting this speech that is so central to this conversation, which he titled Pictures and Progress. He gave this speech initially in 1861 during the Civil War, and his argument then confused his audience, because the argument was that it wouldn't be combat, which he anticipated or then saw when he re-delivered the speech in 1865, that would create progress, as he saw it, for restructuring this fractured American Union, but instead something as seemingly small and trifle-like as a picture, right? He was ultimately not just an art historian as he's writing the speech, he was looking at the phenomenology of what culture does to us, right? He had in this speech a term, he thought that when you're impacted by, call it a work of art, a picture, your vision of the world changes, he said in this speech, in 1861 and 1865, right? He understood the way in which you can be changed by culture to be critical for the new vision that America required for itself. And so through it, he argued for both placing himself in front of the camera, he is the most photographed American man in the 19th century, and for shifting our notions of citizenship through pictures, right? So I can list the countless different contemporary interventions. I think, though, that it's crucial to understand how much we are in Douglass's lineage with this idea. We have many of the, iconic figures of this idea with us today. We have Deborah Willis, right? This is an extraordinary photographer and photo historian. We have, it's artist-in-residence here, Carrie Mae Weems, right? Who's certainly with us in spirit. And I guess I would end by just saying two things. One of the ways in which Carrie has framed her Grace Notes for Now piece that I curated for the Spoleto Festival that's gone around the nation now, was to think about the way in which art allows us to measure life, right? It's another way of thinking about this idea. And finally, I would just say on a personal note, I wouldn't have understood this idea with as much impact if not for a certain man whose name was Shadrach Emanuel Lee. I share his initials, but my name is much more plain, Sarah Elizabeth Lewis. He's my grandfather. And he went to school here in New York City in 1924 in Brooklyn Public School. And in the 11th grade, he wanted to know where African Americans were in history books. And the teacher told him that African Americans had done nothing to merit inclusion, and so there was nothing to miss. And he didn't accept that as an answer. And he was expelled for his impertinence in doing so. And so he never went back to high school. His pride was so wounded from that experience. And he went on to support my family in other ways, but primarily what he was known for in the end was being an artist, being a painter. And I understand the crucial power of culture for citizenship really through that example.
Sarah, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that and putting the pieces together that way. And Jose, as you can tell us a bit about the work of Define American and your work more broadly, you quite literally have been working with contemporary makers of culture, particularly popular culture, in the same spirit of Frederick Douglass, to begin to change the way that we imagine answers to the question, who is American? Answers to the question, who is us, right? And something that Sarah said, I think, is really important also to the core of your work, which is that for the longest time, certainly in law, but as well in our norms, Americanness and whiteness were so tightly together bound that they seemed to be the same thing. And now they are coming unwound. And you have both written and spoken about this. And so from your vantage point, how can art, popular culture, accelerate that unwinding or reweave or take things in the directions that Sarah is describing?
First of all, thank you for having us here. Eric and Damien have been amazing collaborators. Real collaborators, meaning they actually want to listen to what you have to say. Instead of just figuring out how you exist and what they're doing, right? I think that's real collaboration. It's an honor to be here, and as an undocumented person, given what's happening right now, I'm thinking a lot about resistance. So like what resistance looks like physically and spiritually. Like to me, showing up, as Eric said, like that's resistance. That's saying, okay, I'm at the Park Armory in the corner of 66 and Park if you want to go find us, right? I don't know how many other undocumented people are sitting here. Don't raise your hand. But, right? If you want to come find us, we're right here. So I think that's, I have to say, by the way, to your point, yesterday was Toni Morrison's birthday. And I moved here when I was 12. By 8th grade, my English teacher, Mr. Zahner, assigned The Bluest Eye to read, which was, to me, confusing, devastating. I didn't understand what was going on. And then I remember after reading the book, it led me to go to the library and try to find other Toni Morrison books. And the librarian, Mrs. Gable, who was an amazing woman, led me to the African-American section of the library. And I was like, what's that, right? Why isn't that in the American, like, why isn't Toni Morrison near Faulkner or like, Mark Twain? And it was such an interesting understanding of category, right? And as I go back to that novel again and again, one of the biggest messages of that book is what it means to not surrender to the master narrative, right? Whiteness in America, male property owning whiteness in America as the ultimate narrative in America, the master narrative. And as someone who's undocumented, as someone who's gay, as someone who is quote unquote othered, it was such a, I really don't know what I would have done, frankly, if I hadn't discovered Toni Morrison and James Baldwin as early as I did. In many ways, I think their work as Americans gave me license and imagination to think of Americanness and citizenship beyond papers and laws, right? And since right now, this is why art for us is so central. What is that great Toni Morrison quote? We die, that may be the measure of our lives, but we do language, right? That may be the meaning of, that's the measure of our life, is language. So what kind of new language are we creating at a time like this? And for me, a big part of this is this is my reporter coming in right now. 88% of the total population growth of America in the next 50 years are gonna come from mostly Latinos and Asians. 88% in the next 50 years. At a time when the Black Lives Matter movement is as essential as ever, at a time when this country can barely talk about blackness and whiteness without falling apart. Now you're adding the Latino and the Asian, the Afro-Latino, the mix, all of that in it. So to me, that is the new language that we must create together. And art and culture is to me at the center of even the hieroglyphics and even the physical way of creating that language. Politics isn't going to do it. Politicians are not going to do it. They're too busy getting elected. And I'm saying this as somebody, as Eric knows, I've been traveling nonstop now after coming out as undocumented almost 6 years ago. I really want to get to know America. America in Alabama, America in Wisconsin, America in Ohio. And one anecdote, I was struck when people would come to events that we were doing with like Tea Party meetings or whatever, and people would say like, hey, why can't you do it the right way like my great-great-great-grandfather did? So then I engaged this woman who was like, hey, so when did your great-great-great-grandfather got here? Oh, 1863. But there was no border patrol in 1863. People didn't need visas in 1863. So when you say did it the right way, what was the right way? Oh, she showed up. Oh, okay, right. That's a cultural conversation, and I think that's what this is about, to me.
So I want to connect a few dots here. And Tania, one of the things that Jose just said about that artists will lead this, not politicians, kind of scrapes the top layer off a deeper question that's about power and the nature of power, right? We live in a time right now where for all the might of the arts, we still, our conversations, your sense of bodily safety are affected by choices made by people with a particular form of power, which is political power, right? You have experienced this in your life in Cuba, both as an artist and as a citizen, being on the wrong end of a state system of power that didn't like the way that you were making art, expressing voice, opening possibility for other people. What is your take on this question of can art trump politics?
Do we have to use that verb?
It's all about provocation.
Is there another verb? No, I do feel that art is beyond the imaginary and all of these things. It's the place when everybody can be themselves and other people can observe without judging. It's a place where you can propose a future before it arrives and share with people and see, what do you think about it? What would you do if this will be this or that? So I feel that right now, with the immigration situation, it's more important than ever, because it's a place where people can be also unsure of themselves, and it's okay. You know, because sometimes politics or the other people who are observing want you to define yourself very clearly. And through art, you can be unsure. You can be in the making. And it's okay. So I think that's why for me it's so powerful. And that's why I feel, this is just a little, that's why I feel now it's so important that institutions like this one and all the art institutions in the country will give spaces in a more long-term permanent situation to artists, so they can meet at any time. They can be places of, like safe places for people to go and create collectively.
Nisha, the fact that your office decided to create an artist-in-residence position suggests that you get the same intersection of art and political or state power. But one thing I'm particularly interested in for you, I mean, you described the visual work that you were creating, explaining various programs of yours, but showing images of immigrants from all over New York. And what that was doing in part was just recognizing that there's always a story in our head. And the question is whether you are going to name and, if necessary, displace that story with another story, right? But there was some kind of implicit recognition here that your job, even though it's about programs and policies and budgets, was also to use your channels to change the story that's going on in people's heads of who's an immigrant, who's a New Yorker, who's an American, right? And what are some of the other, I mean, do you think of your work in those terms as a narrative channel in addition to all of the governmental acts that you have to take?
Without a doubt, and I would love to be able to do it even better, but you know, another example, and you know, strangely, it's been ad campaigns or sort of marketing campaigns where we've been able to do this at greatest scale, but I mentioned our municipal ID program, and there, the ad campaign was the same thing, being very deliberate about showing who are the people for whom this is a card that's eligible, so it doesn't fall into a certain box of, oh, this is the card for those types of undocumented immigrants. And the tagline we had was simply, I am NYC. And the power of that, it communicates to the public at large, it communicates to the people who are going to get the program, but frankly, it even communicates to people who work in city government, right? There's 350,000 people who work for the city of New York, and if they're riding the train and they're seeing that, then they know this is who I serve. And it's a mix of many, many different types of people, and this is what New York is. The other thing I'll say on this that I found actually to be pretty shocking when I started my job, I went on a sort of listening tour. I was meeting with lots of different groups in different communities, and more often than not, I had many folks in the community say, this is the first time someone from the mayor's office has come to talk to us. That's totally unacceptable. And so I think that's why the partnership with Tania and the sort of work that she's doing around how we as government communicate with, build with, and really show maybe a different side of power and the relationship between power and the people is very, very significant.
Sarah, I want to read something to you, and then I'd like you to just tell us what images, symbols, icons from the vast catalog in your mind and heart come to mind as I read this. Section 1. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. That's Section 1 of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States. Right. What flows in your mind and heart as I read that?
Yeah. So here we are in 1868, still in this moment, right? The date of the 14th. Oh, sorry. Here we are in 1868 with that 14th Amendment, still living out what it states. Many images come to my mind, I think, and it will connect up with, I think, the work that Nisha just described she's doing. I think actually I'll just start with it, though. The first image that comes to my mind is actually the one that out of, say, 100 of my students at Harvard, many of us found to be the most impactful over the course of the 12 weeks. And it's an image that very few people know, but if you even just Google it, you might not ever be able to forget it. It's the living portrait of Woodrow Wilson from 1918. And at the time, there was this huge phenomenon of creating living portraits out of masses of citizens, between 10,000 and 30,000 citizens, creating one image collectively. But in order to create this, Arthur Mole, who was one of the main photographers, would have to get people to stand in a rigid formation for hours, right, up to 8 hours, as he did with the US Army and Navy to create this. And so the reason why that image, I think, is so impactful is it speaks to the notion of rigidity, right, that we have to move away from to expand the concept of citizenship. There's an insistent homogeneity in the look of the figures, insistent kind of whiteness there. In that same moment, you start to see with Hine and many others who are documenting immigrants, a particularization that starts to come through, a kind of move to understanding the individuality of different subjects. Augustus Sherman, there's a great book that Aperture published recently of immigrants from Ellis Island coming through. He's created a whole set of images that defy the look of those living portraits, right, that show what this 14th Amendment allows us to understand about the expanded concept of citizenship. But the first two images that came to mind when you read that were these. Gordon Parks' American Gothic, 1942, with Ella Watson standing beneath the American flag, holding the mop and broom in the Farm Securities Administration office, staged to contest the Grant Wood American Gothic, right, and to expand the notion of who counts, right, whose work counts, whose labor counts, and what gender counts. But the other one was the Dorothea Lange image of the Japanese businessman who was being tagged for removal during the period of Japanese internment. You see these kind of menacing hands on this citizen, on this man, and his own tag on him. And this image was such a detonation that it was impounded by the U.S. Interior and only recently came to light. So these are the few.
One of the things that, as we gather here right now in Times Square, Jose was telling me there is a large march or protest forming in defense of our Muslim neighbors and friends. And today is an apt day for that because it marks an anniversary related to the internment and incarceration of Japanese Americans. And Jose, we've talked a lot. I mean, I know the 14th Amendment resonates with you also in a in some ways painful way, but also wistful way. But I think that the question right now, when you think about the echoes of history, the echoes of internment, how, I guess this is a very simple personal question, but maybe a complicated one politically too. How are you summoning the courage to give other people courage in this time right now? Because your visibility means that a lot of people, not just undocumented people, but a lot of people who in recent months have come to feel like they are part of deeply disfavored groups are turning to you through social media in various ways. And you yourself carry just personally various burdens. How are you finding, and what is the role of art or culture in helping you find some sense of courage that you can actually make contagious in this moment?
What a dangerous question. We firmly believe at Define American that storytelling is intervention, it's correction, and it's liberation, right? Like you can't invalidate someone's story. You have laws, you have all these policies, but someone's story, the very existence and the complications of one's life supersedes any law that you could possibly put together, right? I would be lying to you if I didn't tell you that this is an absolute time of panic for us. The executive orders that were just signed the other day basically said that the 11 million undocumented people in this country, it doesn't matter how we got here, it doesn't matter the circumstances, we're absolutely deportable, right? Now, how I explained that to my Filipina-American grandmother, who's a naturalized US citizen who's 78, and she just thinks that, you're in New York, can they pick you up? I'm like, no, Lola, I'll be fine, you know. How I explained that to her, how I explained that to my family, how I explained it to all these young people, people of all ages who are writing and asking, do we stay home? How do we, you know, there was the day without immigrants, right? I heard from so many people who wanted to go but couldn't go because they lived in places that being visible comes at a cost. So for me, it's a question of, given that I am in a privileged position to be visible, I'm so glad that you mentioned the good and bad immigrant dichotomy, right? For many people, I'm the acceptable immigrant. I have a Pulitzer, it's only a plaque, you can have it. I'd rather have a green card, right? Apparently, apparently because of that, it makes me a good immigrant, or because I talk like this. And I only talk like this because of Stephen Sondheim CDs from the public library and Charlie Rose from PBS. That's why I talk like this. That in itself is a cultural assimilation for me, right? At a time like this, it's so dangerous that as President Trump defines all of us as criminals, that's what he's done. What are the rest of you gonna do to combat that? Like, what's gonna happen when they start rounding people up in Queens and in Brooklyn? Like, what are the community centers gonna do? What are the schools gonna do? What are the libraries gonna do? Like, and as for resistance, you know, I've been fighting for a citizenship that people take for granted. And that's why Eric and I bonded from the very beginning, because this is a question about citizenship. It is absolutely about that. And to me, one definition of that is that we bear witness to each other and we show up for each other. And I think more than ever, we're being tested. And I sincerely hope that all of us rise up to that test.
Well, thank you, Jose. And let me, in closing this, I'm going to toss it over in a moment to Tom Finkelpearl, who's the Commissioner of the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and he's going to offer some thoughts of summation and response to this conversation here. But I just want to say in closing here, the notion of citizenship that we end with is similar to the one that we began with, which is rooted in ethics and imagination as much as place and documents. But I think there's one piece I want to underscore a little bit here that actually is a theme that every one of our panelists, but particularly Jose just now, articulated. Yes, it is about bearing witness. Yes, it is about showing up. Yes, it is about leaning in and being present. But I think particularly for people like me, who I'm a second-generation American, I'm a child of immigrants, all I did was to have the dumb luck to be born here, right? I did nothing to have earned the citizenship that I get to take for granted. And my entire life and career has been sort of in penance for that fact, to try to earn it. But I think the question that people, particularly who have the privilege of having had the dumb luck to be born here, and those who are immigrants who have been able to attain the status of citizenship, the question to underscore right now is, what are you willing to give up in defense of these ideas, right? Citizenship at the moral level is not just about belonging and drawing certain ethical or even legal boundaries around belonging, but it is a question of, what's it going to cost? What's it going to cost you? Tax dollars, yes. Time, yes. Attention to be paid and not spent elsewhere, paying attention to the news, what have you, yes. But on a moral level, when it comes to cases, when it comes to roundups, and it comes to friends, neighbors, collaborators being in harm's way, what's it going to cost you, and what are you going to be willing to spend? And I think that's a question that every one of us has to reckon with, that the times bring to the surface right now, and the beauty and the power of this gathering and the frame that we have of art and culture is that, as Tania said so beautifully, art allows us to begin to forecast that future. And I invite you not to forecast only the utopian great future that we can have, but frankly, to forecast the near-term, somewhat darker dystopian future that might lie in wait for us, and to think about, in that near future, what are you going to do? How are you going to show up? How are you going to live like a citizen? So please join me in thanking this panel, and then in welcoming to the podium Tom Finkelpearl.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to start again by thanking the organizers. Amazing day. Thank you, Rebecca, for hosting it, and for everybody who organized it. So here's something, a very minor thing you could do, which is, this is the municipal ID card. How many people in this room have it? All right, so that's what, maybe a quarter of the room. It's free. 900,000 New Yorkers have it. This is by far the most successful ID card. It's a way you can sort of be a brother and a sister to our undocumented friends in New York City. If you're undocumented or documented, it's good to get the card. 500,000 free memberships at cultural institutions have been granted using the card, and you can get a free membership to this fantastic cultural institution. So why not do it? It's something. But one of the things that was sort of a leitmotif of what you guys were talking about was, if you ask this question of the role of culture in making it an American, Americanness is fluid, right? What America is changes when different people become citizens, when different people become part of the flow. And you could just look at what happens when people come into the country in relationship to food or culture or music. But also that idea of the greatest American art form, let's say, is jazz, right? At the time that jazz was being created by African American creative people, were they really allowed to be American in that American moment? They were living in the segregated South where they couldn't get a good education. So what happens to America through culture is that culture changes when who is allowed to be an American changes. I was quite interested in that moment when you said from the 14th Amendment, it lists life, liberty, and what do you expect to be the next word? Pursuit of happiness, right? But it's property, right? So I actually think that living a full life and happiness is an essential part of being a full citizen. And one of the things we've done recently, in the coming weeks, there's going to be something called the Social Impact of the Arts Study coming out. It's a 2-year study by University of Pennsylvania. I don't want to give away what it's going to talk about fully. But the idea of having a rich cultural life is actually associated with community thriving and community health. So they're in Philadelphia, where the University of Pennsylvania team has been studying for years. There's actually less diabetes, less crime, and better school participation in communities that are rich in culture. So which parts of our life in America is culture allowed to happen and supported at the highest level? And the answer is high-income communities. So how do you spread that, the cultural life of America from immigrant communities, from disenfranchised communities, from the communities that have been left out, and infuse Americanness with the full culture of what's available here, is what I was thinking about as I was sitting there. So, and I think the other thing, and this gets back to the idea of sort of culture in relationship to resistance, was I was thinking about Sarah Lewis's Aperture. Here's an ad for Aperture. Go buy that. It's been sold out and reprinted already, so I don't need to help you sell it. What does resistance look like? That's an artistic question. It's a cultural question. So my image of the civil rights movement is black and white photographs taken from a particular point of view, and actually a moment in which documentary photography changed the way we looked at ourselves as Americans. So I think that's well documented in that Aperture, but that's something we have to think about now. What does resistance look like, literally, now? And then just a couple more points. One is that we were both talking to our son who's in Indonesia this morning, And he was asking us that same question, Eric, that you just asked. So what are you willing to do? What are we all willing to do? And he very humanized. He said, don't forget Grandma's family in Hungary. They came for that family, and a lot of the family ended up in Treblinka, right? So somebody didn't shelter them. The community of non-Jews didn't rise up against the government to protect those people. And this has been said over and over again. But I think that is the question. To what point are we going to sit silently by as the other is victimized and made more other? So those were some of my points. I thought it was a fantastic panel. And thanks, everybody. Go get the ID card.